Good afternoon. Hello, Christoph. It is a little bit after 2 in the afternoon here in Germany, 23rd of June, Tuesday. And with us, we have Christoph, and Christoph is our 13th story in this series. And let's start. Christoph, tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Laura, for the invitation. So I'm Christoph, currently living in Malta in Europe, and I am 25 years old. I graduated in the health sciences from the University of Malta, but I've been working as a journalist for around 3 years now, full-time, with a media outlet which is mainly online. We publish in Maltese and in English. And it's also related to radio stations, so I often read news at different times of the day on that radio station.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about Malta? Because it's a small place and not many people know, although I've never been there, but I know I have a lot of friends that have been there and I know it's beautiful. But maybe just a couple of words about it.
Okay, so Malta is in Europe, as I mentioned before. It's an island. It's an archipelago made of 3 islands. And the biggest one is Malta. The second largest is Gozo. Both of them are habited by people. And the third one is Comino, which is mainly a tourist spot for people going with boats and swimming. And there's basically just one family of around 4 people living there. So the main islands are Malta and Gozo. Population of the country is around 500,000 inhabitants. We have one main airport, which connects us to the rest of the world, with our national airline Air Malta, flying to different destinations, including Germany. And Malta mainly attracts tourists seeking the sun and the sea, especially in the summertime. We have pristine beaches, which attract many different people from around the world, mainly from the UK. That is our largest tourism market. We also have an economy based a lot on iGaming, which is sort of internet gambling. We have large companies like Betson and Gig operating in Malta. So mainly, since we don't have natural resources, our largest product we can offer the world are human resources. So there's going to be a big drive, and is a big drive in the IT sector going on. So that's basically it.
Okay, well, it's a must place to go once this pandemic is at a good stage or over. But just going back to you now, you told us that you've been working as a journalist for the past 3 years there in Malta. Can you tell us how has it changed, if it has changed, the work that you were doing right before the pandemic started, so pre-COVID-19, and now? Did you have to reinvent yourself or no?
Mainly no, but obviously there were changes taking place. So I'm part of a small newsroom, which means that I'm covering many different issues, not just one specific issue. So one moment I'm covering what the Prime Minister is saying, another moment I'm covering an accident which happened in a street in some locality. So it's very different. All days are never the same. The main change on the coronavirus was obviously the story, which basically dominated every single news item I was producing, was focused on just the coronavirus, with obviously then some bits and pieces of other news items there and here. The main physical change was that I was working mainly from home. So press conferences were being held via Zoom. Some of them we could ask questions to. We had daily briefings by the superintendent of public health, also eventually via Zoom when people were being urged to stay at home and work at home. But now these measures have been started to be lifted, and I'm back working from the office nowadays. So there were changes. Obviously, you're a journalist, you have to report the story, but it's also a story which is affecting you. Luckily, I'm privileged. I was in a privileged situation, and I could continue working, had my job, did not suffer any health consequences, did not have any direct health family members suffering from the coronavirus. So I was in a very lucky position to be able to say that no, it hasn't affected me personally, but obviously that's not the same situation for other people.
Okay, yeah, and like you said, you were privileged. You're one of the lucky ones, which is very good. And talking about Malta now, can you tell us what is the most important topic? What is going on in the news regarding the pandemic that everybody is concerned about or is hearing about? Tell us a little bit of what's going on in Malta.
So in Malta, as I mentioned, we're starting to ease the restrictions now. So we had our first case in March.
Yeah.
So would you like to ask me the question again?
Yeah, no problem. It's the things of Zoom, right?
Yep.
My question was just what is happening right now in Malta? What are the concerns that people are having? What's on the news right now? What are people talking about? Always regarding the pandemic.
So at the moment, as I mentioned earlier, the restrictions are starting to be eased with regards to the coronavirus pandemic. So we had our first case in the 7th of March, and now the daily case toll is never going above 5 at the moment. So the health authorities are very happy with the situation at the moment. Restrictions are being eased. We have restaurants which are already open, bars which are already open. The airport is currently still closed, but this will no longer be the case in July. So the health authorities are happy with the stable situation. The concern of some doctors, however, is that Malta may be lifting its measures too quickly. They say that if this is done, the authorities won't be able to see which measures maybe not be helping the situation. So for example, if you lift the restaurant measures and the airport lifting measures, for example, at the same time, they fear that they might not be able to see which of those measures is problematic. Should there be an increase in the caseload? So they're saying, lift the measures one by one, leaving that gap of 2 weeks, which is the incubation period. So then authorities can identify which measures are the problematic ones. If a measure is lifted and there's no increase in cases, that's fine, and they can move on to the next one. Another concern is that the risk assessments, which is the scientific advice the public health officials are giving the government, has not yet been published. Journalists have asked repeatedly for these risk assessments to be published. However, neither the Prime Minister, neither the Superintendent of Public Health have released these so far. And recently, a group of pathologists have also again urged the public health authorities to release these risk assessments so that they can see that the government is indeed following scientific advice when it's either lifting a measure or introducing one.
And from what you're explaining, what is happening in Malta is what has happened and is happening in many countries, bigger than you or not. It's that is really not the point because the problems are the same. The latest we've seen with Spain, for instance, Spain has also been hit very hard in general, but also economically. And of course, now it's summer, as you well know, and same situation with Malta. So income comes from the tourists. The latest that they're looking into is just really opening their borders now, and anybody that wants to come can come. Problem is that so far it looks like they will not enforce a quarantine from travelers coming to Spain. And of course, you've seen, for instance, the UK that has been particularly hard hit, that will be able to go in. So the problem is, yes, the economy is very important, but like you said, one of the things that should be encouraged is the fact of like easing the restrictions at a phasing manner. Exactly, because you need time to understand, is it enough? Is it good? Can we go ahead or not? You said now that for now the airport is closed, so no one's coming in from Malta, but that will change in July. July is around the corner. can you tell me more about what, or is it still not very clear based on what you said that it hasn't been shared with the journalists? What's the latest that you've heard? What is the plan with Malta? Will there be a quarantine or no?
So far, the indications are that there will be no mandatory quarantine in place. Before, in around March time, the government had started introducing a mandatory 14-day quarantine from people coming from a number of countries. Then that was extended to people coming from anywhere in the world. Until then, the airports and ports were closed on the 21st of March to and from Malta for commercial travel. There were some repatriation flights from people who were stuck abroad who wanted to come to Malta. There were also some flights for foreign people in Malta who wanted to go back home. So those were some exceptions. But cargo was allowed to fly in and out because obviously we're an island, we depend on food and other provisions coming from abroad. So that had to be an exception. Now, the indication is that the airports will be open on the 1st of July for what the government is describing as sort of safe corridor countries. So this is a select number of countries, mainly in Europe. For example, we have Germany, we have Ireland, we have Switzerland. The last list I saw did not include the United Kingdom on this list, which again is significant because the UK is Malta's largest tourism market. However, on the 15th of July, it seems that there will be no specific list and it will be again open and everything will, as the Prime Minister Roberto Bella said, back to normal. Again, there are concerns by, as I mentioned, the pathologists who are again insisting on the risk assessments and insisting on the measures to be lifted gradually because doctors are still saying that the virus is still here, it isn't eradicated, and we still have to remain vigilant.
Exactly, and always take into consideration that it takes a blink of an eye to change things. For instance, now you just told me that one of the countries that are, let's say, acceptable to go to Malta is Germany, for instance, because we have done very well in Germany. Unfortunately, things do change. The latest is that our R0 has gone up. It is true that it is specifically because of some individual outbreaks. But for instance, it was announced today that the town where the outbreak occurred is going on lockdown. So we have 100,000 people that are going on lockdown. Our R0, which had been very good in the last days or so, it has been slowly going up. And today, the latest I had seen was that in the 4-day interval, it has risen to 2.76. And of course, the reason why they're locking the area, the town where the outbreak took place, is to understand how far the virus has spread, right? And this shows that no matter how good the country you're in is handling the situation, it can change and it affects that country. But let's see how it affects Malta, right? Let's see, will Germany still be on the yes, come and enjoy the summer in Malta list? Or will it be like, no, let's wait 15 days? But going back to Malta, just you already spoke a little bit about it, but can you tell us more on what was the first measure that Malta took to to prevent the spread of COVID-19? Just tell us a little bit of the history of the phases and just the prevention, the measures that were taken.
Okay, so we had our first case on the 7th of March, which authorities believe was an imported one. So someone abroad coming onto the island and having the virus, COVID-19 virus. So then schools were closed on the 12th of March, which is basically a week later, and they remain closed until the scholastic year, with the plan being that these will now reopen in September for the next scholastic year. The airport was closed on the 21st of March for commercial travel both in and out of Malta, except for some exceptions. And we had the non-essential shops, which means hairdresser, video game outlets, electronic stores closed on the 23rd of March. Deliveries could still take place, however, there were obviously then some restrictions. Now, Prime Minister Roberta Bella is urging the country to go back to normality, so measures have already started being lifted. People can go back to restaurants, to dine in, to take out. The mass events restriction, which was previously up to 75 people, will soon be lifted. Malta is technically still in a state of health emergency. However, this will be lifted on the 30th of June. So we're still conducting tests. However, there are some concerns that the testing number is not always as high as it should be. So for example, in the weekends, it fluctuates around the 500s, when on other days we're doing 1,000, 1,500 tests. So then people would maybe question, yes, we might not be finding a large number of cases, but the number of tests is going down. And the superintendent of public health has many previous occasions said that the testing must be enhanced. Again, it's important to note that the health authorities were never really concerned that much about the situation. They always described it as stable. There was a point in time when we were seeing hospital beds being put in every corner of the hospital. Malta has one main acute hospital, Mater Dei, but before, when I was a student, we had sort of libraries and lecture rooms in this hospital. Beds were put in the libraries, beds were put in the lecture rooms, so students were seeing a transformation of this hospital. There were also plans to build a separate prefabricated hospital to be built urgently. However, the government decided to drop these plans. There is still a concern of that there might be two epidemics being battled in Malta in come winter, being the influenza virus, which is seasonal, and the coronavirus if there is no vaccine. So again, the health authorities are insisting that Malta still needs to have a number of beds, just in case the worst case scenario happens and Malta will be fighting two battles on the same front: influenza virus, which hospitals all over the world struggle with every year, and now this pandemic, which has also seen health systems crumble because of its effects.
And tell me a little bit more. You just mentioned that now people they can go out dining, restaurants are opening. Is there any contact tracing? Do they have to sign like their name and their phone number when they go to the restaurant, or no?
For restaurants, no. You just go in there, business as usual. I've been in one restaurant recently, and the waiters are wearing visors. However, admittedly, some are not really wearing it properly, so the visor is just lifted and is just sort of for show, and some just leave it on. But again, it's up to the people who there didn't seem to be concerned. All tables were full. So it's a case-by-case basis. However, I also know some people who are still trying to social distance. The government recently, when the Prime Minister Roberta Bella insisted that measures will start being lifted, he mentioned three main points, which the government will be trying to emphasize on, which is hygiene, social distancing, and the wearing of masks, which is still being encouraged. So in Malta, we have people encouraged to wear either the masks, which can be either those medical masks or the cloth mask, which one can reuse a number of times, or as the visor. So it depends on the personal preference of the individual.
And talking about the masks and visors and just face cloths in general, is that something that is used just to go when you're indoors, or is it something that is also used outdoors?
It's a personal preference, so I believe that the only restrictions now for sort of mandatory mask usage is on public transport. But again, I've seen many reports that even the drivers aren't always wearing the masks or visors, and even the passengers aren't always wearing the masks or visors. So outdoors, you do see people wearing masks. Just yesterday, I was covering a protest, and demonstrators were urged to wear either a mask or visors. But again, this is now up to the person preference of the individual.
Okay. Yeah, and with a protest, it's difficult, especially because in the end, masks are part of the solution, but they're not the solution. Doesn't mean that if I'm wearing a mask, then, we can be one really next to the other. And in a
And
protest,
health and health authorities have also repeatedly stressed that it's not just mask wearing, you have to wear the mask correctly. So if someone's using the disposable mask multiple times or even removing them wrongly, you could make the situation worse for yourself and for other people. So it's not just mask wearing, it's the correct usage of the masks.
exactly. And unfortunately, we're at the end of June and you still see people. I see people when I'm outside here in Germany, like you said, that yes, they do have a mask on them, but it's not correctly, used. They put it around their neck, or they're holding it like with their hands, and like you said, it makes it worse. So it's wearing masks, wearing them properly, hygienically, and remembering that masks are just part of the solution. They're not the solution.
The situation will now be interesting in summer because it's already hot as it is in Malta, with temperatures going above 30 degrees. So if I'm somewhere, I'm in a suit and I'm in the sun for 5 minutes, it's already horrible. If I'm doing that and wearing a mask, we're now going to have to see how we're going to be dealing with that.
Exactly.
So it's going to be an interesting time.
It's going to be difficult, interesting, like you said. And tell me, when was it that you realized that the situation, the pandemic, was more serious than what people were saying or what you were hearing on the news? Or was there a specific moment that, let's say, you got goosebumps and you thought, okay, wait, something is really wrong, this is worse? Or was it just gradual as countries started locking, or Malta started locking? I'd like to know, what was your experience?
So in Malta, luckily, again, overall, because you obviously have specific instances, the health authorities were always happy with the situation, continuously describing it as stable. We currently have around 660 cases, and our death toll so far is 9. Again, the population is 500,000, so one has to take that into consideration. There was one day in April which had authorities worried, which was when a total of 52 cases were registered in one 24-hour period. So to put this into perspective, 52 cases in one day in Malta is like the UK having 7,000 cases in one day. Again, we have one hospital. The prefabricated hospital was not yet built. So if there had to be a surge in ITU admissions, ventilator usage, we're a small country with limited resources. However, the health authorities were obviously aware of the situation and were increasing the beds and number of ventilators on the island. However, Malta is just south of Sicily, so the population of Malta will be keeping a close eye what's happening in Italy. And we've seen the northern parts of Italy being struck heavily by the pandemic, health systems crumbling, people dying alone, large number of coffins coming in and being buried, sometimes even people alone or with a very number of people present at that funeral. So people were very conscious of what's happening very close to our shores. So Sicily is just an hour flight away from Malta. In Malta, the situation, luckily for the country, was stable when it came to health. There were people who lost their job. There are people still struggling to put food on the table. There are people who are still being given government aid to cope with its effects. The tourism industry was practically at a standstill. We have hotels which were affected, which people can't come on the island because there are no flights. We had restaurants being affected because there were no foreigners or tourists to go and eat there. There were Maltese people who were scared for their safety, who didn't dine in. They couldn't dine in at one point in time because restaurants were closed. People were also concerned about delivery and takeaway, but there was no scientific evidence that this would be cause for concern. So the economic impact was still there, is still there, and the government recently unveiled the so-called mini budgets, which measures to sort of kickstart the economy. And sort of one popularly mentioned one is a scheme of €100 vouchers. So people over the age of 16 in Malta will be given sets of vouchers, €80 in total to spend in restaurants and bars and things like this, and €20 voucher to spend in retail, meaning sort of clothes and other similar items. Again, when we heard that the government was planning on building a prefabricated hospital, people were sort of then realizing that, yes, this is a serious situation, which is unprecedented. We've never seen schools closed, we've never seen restaurants closed. We obviously knew that the influenza period hits the hospital hard, but to have another separate hospital being built urgently and sort of seeing the pictures from other hospitals abroad and imagining, okay, this is what it's going to look like soon in Malta. That would make people and also journalists think of what's going to happen next.
And would you say that was the moment that in a way affected you the most, when you heard for the first time that a hospital was going to be built for COVID-19? Or was it when you had 52 new cases in one day? Or was it earlier when you saw the situation in the north of Italy? Or it was like a mix? Was there a moment where you, Christoph, felt, okay, it's more serious than what I thought or what everybody thought?
It's definitely a mix, because on one hand you're seeing a relatively stable situation in Malta, but at the same time you're seeing doctors in Italy, which is our neighbor, warning other countries, prepare yourself because this is what's going to happen in your countries. Now, it's still too early to say what led to this stable situation in Malta. Scientists obviously would start indicating that it's relatively easier to control the borders since we're an island. So the only ways in and out are through boats, through airports, which in March were closed. We also have a smaller population, and sort of some communities might be more tight-knit than others, so maybe that would help contact tracing. We also had people praising the public health officials, so it seems that they were doing their job correctly. But obviously, things are never rosy. So we've had the Prime Minister Robert Abela being criticized for his communication, sometimes sort of contradicting his own health minister and the superintendent of public health. He was also criticized when he announced that people who were previously fined for breaking social distancing rules and mandatory quarantine rules would be eligible for an amnesty. People criticized him, police criticized him, doctors criticized that message, saying that it undermined the previous work the authorities were doing. Also, he was criticized for downplaying the severity of the case. A famous quote of his was, "Waves are in the sea," referencing the so-called second wave of the coronavirus, when the health minister and the public health officials were keeping an eye on what's happening in the situation. So these mixed messages might not have always helped the situation when people are already anxious. It's a new situation for doctors, it's a new situation for the public, it's a new situation for journalists. So there's this sort of interconnection between all of this. So it's a very delicate situation, and as you said, it just takes one instance where something could go very, very wrong. And in this case, it's the cost of human lives, which is something our society cherishes greatly.
Indeed, and that's how it should be. Uh, you already mentioned a couple of things, but maybe you could summarize it in just one chunk. Uh, Based on what has happened, on your observations abroad in Italy, your neighbor, and what the different measures that have been taken in Malta from the very beginning, and also the situation how it is now. Could you tell us a little bit, what are your hopes? So what are your concerns? What is it that you think is going to happen in the next few days, in the next few weeks in Malta? What is it that you wish will not happen, but you have a feeling and you will tell us why things might go another way? Just give us a look into your hopes and concerns for Malta for the next few days and the next few weeks.
Okay, so technically we are still in a state of public health emergency. However, in the next few days, this will be lifted along with, so basically by the 15th of July, there will be no more restrictive measures in place, which would technically mean Malta will be back to normality, whatever that normality is, should be, or will be. The concerns of the doctors still remains, also obviously some doctors, that the measures might be lifted too soon. Again, the situation in Malta was relatively always stable, and there has been close collaboration between the health authorities and the government about how and when these measures should be lifted. I'm not in a position to comment on the scientific advice the scientists have been given, because the risk assessments, the scientific advice which the scientists are passing on to government, have never been published. So one wonders why this is the case. What is this risk assessment? And having these documents to evaluate and criticize and compare and contrast them to other countries is useful for scientists, for the government, and also for the general public, because people should have a right to know. So we've seen ethics councils in the UK saying that for a politician to say simply that we are following the science but not showing that scientific evidence is simply not enough. In Malta, we have a lack of these think tanks and institutions and ethical councils. However, the situation, sometimes you can compare and contrast these sort of quotes and snippets and suggestions from one country to the other. However, not all scientists agree that it's so easy to compare one country to another, because there are so many different variables. One particular number the scientists in Malta have always been particularly interested is the R naught number, which refers to the average number of people someone with COVID-19 or any other virus would infect. And at the moment, we don't have direct access to the current number,
Oh, so you
but
don't
it
know.
should be not that we don't have constant access to numbers. So sometimes during a press conference, we would ask the superintendent of public health what the current R factor is. However, these daily press conferences have been now stopped. However, the last time this was referenced, it was at around 1 or under 1. And again, there is no indication that the plan to lift the measures won't be in place. However, once again, there's winter coming. Influenza has always been an issue for Malta, but any other health system. So it's hard to predict what the situation will look like. Supposedly there are enough beds. The prefabricated hospital won't be built as of yet. So those plans have been scrapped. So obviously the health authorities and the public would hope that there is a number of beds to deal with the situation. When a vaccine is produced, if a vaccine is produced, Malta should be able to procure it as part of a joint initiative with the EU. We're a small country, so Malta would depend heavily on other states and creating sort of agreements with other states. And we're just an island of 500,000 people, which is even smaller than the population of some large cities. So this is something, it's interesting and something the audience should always keep in mind during this conversation.
Right, of course, because like you said, 52 new cases for you, which may seem nothing or little for many cities, many countries, when you convert them, let's say, there are 7,000 new cases in a country like the UK. So it does make a difference. Based on what you just told us, would it be correct for me to assume then that the concerns that have been spoken about from the health officials match your concerns? Or do you have something else from your perspective, just as Christoph, a journalist and citizen of Malta? What is it that you hope? What is it that you're concerned about?
Well, as a citizen, I would guess my concerns are very similar to others. So obviously, of what one hopes one doesn't get the virus, because from a sort of bread and butter point of view, it means that you're in a quarantine, you can't work. If you live in a small household, it means that either you have to stay isolated or your whole family is in isolation, lockdown. That means they can't work and it's harder to go buy things and things like that. Obviously, you can't compare someone with has no or mild symptoms of coronavirus, because it's always important to realize that having coronavirus is not a death sentence for everyone. However, that doesn't mean that one should undermine its effects, because the death toll has been significant. People have lost their lives, and these aren't just numbers. So sure, when those graphs we're seeing around the world, which with daily cases and daily death tolls, we're visualizing a number. However, this means that a mother, a daughter, a father, a son, a life has been lost. This could be someone you know, someone you love, could be a doctor who was previously taking care of you, and now you're lost. So every death, every case means something different to the family and people who are interacting with that person. As a journalist, obviously, we're always looking to find the truth, to have reports and not just simply rely on what he said or what she said. Again, these risk assessments have never been published. So for all we know, there could be the scientific advice and the government advice being exactly word for word the same. Again, it's not just journalists who are asking for these risk assessments. Just recently, the College of Pathologists urged the authorities to publish these risk assessments so they could ease their own concerns that the government is truly listening to the health authorities' advice. And when surveys around the world show that trust in politicians isn't always that high, and even trust in media isn't always that high, we see that trust in doctors and trust in scientists is sometimes relatively higher. Depends obviously on the situation, on the country, and the time period. However, to form an opinion, one must have all the facts, the unfiltered facts, transparency, and this will then allow you to, first of all, think of your own situation and see how you should best protect yourself. So, for example, people were relying on health advice to not wear masks in the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. Then all of a sudden, this advice changed when people started to be urged to wear masks, and they trusted this advice. And from people not wearing masks, we started people buying masks and visors, and regularly washing their hands more than usual, and using hand sanitizers, and learning how to wash one's hands properly and not just dip them in soap and water, shake them off and just keep on going. So it was a learning situation for everyone, and how to adapt. And will companies learn from this and allow people to work from home? Because these things then obviously contribute. There are factors. We have hundreds of people who die from pollution in Malta and asthma every year. and we've had 9 deaths from coronavirus. So it's obviously not fair to downplay one situation over another, because again, these are deaths. However, will authorities, will business owners be truly making changes to the way they operate? And many people mention this period of reflection because coronavirus made you slow down in your life and made you think, will this be a situation in which 2021 comes, everywhere is open and people will just be going back to the old normal? Or will there be still the energy and enthusiasm that people were mentioning during the pandemic? Because often, sometimes promises made in a storm are then quickly forgotten in the calm. So these are things I, as a journalist, will certainly be keeping an eye out on, and also citizens, based on if they're people who can work from home, will be questioning their bosses on. Some people don't have that luxury and will still have to be going out, but maybe they will be questioning whether their employer is giving them the necessary protection. Are they being given masks? Are societies taking care of the most vulnerable? We've seen prisons being affected. We've seen elderly homes being affected. Are the necessary precautions being taken? Is there being an adequate investment being made? Or are people cutting corners and maybe not appreciating the severity of the situation?
And after all, we know that this is not something that is going to go away anytime soon. And the lessons that we are continuously learning, we should start applying them already, not only for the next time, but also for now. The concerns, I think they're pretty similar to a lot of people, privileged and non-privileged. Now, just to finish our conversation right now, today, just the last question will be a little bit more philosophical. So it's really just about Christoph. So just you, not the health authorities or a journalist, but you. If you could speak to the Christoph in 14 days, so to your future self, and you could give him a message, what message would you tell him? What is it that you would tell him?
It's hard to separate the journalist from the Christoph, because as I'm sure you've realized, I'm sure you know, that even when you're out and about in the streets, your eyes are always looking out for the next story. And some of the traits in journalism also influence your personal life, because you're always reading the news with a journalist's eye and sort of noticing things and questioning. But
don't separate. Then it's just you, your future self. Christoph the journalist. What message?
For sure. So nothing should still stop me from following the values which I cherished before the pandemic and should continue cherishing after the pandemic. So, for example, the Washington Post's slogan is "Democracy dies in darkness," and I think that I should continue always searching for the truth. So if the health advice we see is not matching the government's advice, even though I know that I'll be criticized by certain sectors of society, I should go ahead and shine a spotlight on these issues. And in Malta, the coronavirus has already been knocked out of the headlines with fresh corruption allegations surrounding a murder of a journalist in 2017, with the case still ongoing. So it's then a matter of balancing the different things I see which are important and less important. But again, always sticking to one's values, but that doesn't mean that one doesn't learn from the situation. So something maybe one would learn from the pandemic is that not everyone has the privilege I've had. So I, as Christoph, kept my job, but I realized that not everyone could work from a laptop from home. Some people have to go out and deliver groceries. So with this reflection, I see that I am in a privileged position. So I would question myself, was I helping other sectors of society enough before? So hopefully future Christoph will still be questioning and won't wait for another pandemic, and thousands of lives to be lost or else severely disrupted, to start questioning how Christoph should be helping different sectors of society. So abroad, the Black Lives Matter movement again managed to knock coronavirus out of the headlines. Coronavirus was 2020's biggest story, literally saying the front page of BBC, the same story in every single little slot on its website. And again, the Black community was severely impacted in America, for instance, by the coronavirus. Black people have been speaking years about the situation they face and the precarious conditions and how they have always been neglected. Does it again take the killing of George Floyd? Does it again take the killing of hundreds of Black lives due to the coronavirus for people to think and question? So I wonder if future Christoph will be still using this momentum, or if this momentum will unfortunately be lost. So I hope that's not the case.
Okay, so then if we look at a future Christoph closer to the present, so in 2 weeks, in 14 days, correct me if I'm wrong, the message would be stay true to your beliefs, continue acting and questioning and wondering about what you see, what you hear, investigate, and tell the stories in order to help. So just continue doing what you're doing, don't stop, and be thankful.
100%. Obviously, it shouldn't be enough to just be happy with the status quo and just continue as I'm doing without being self-critical or admitting where I could improve. So I don't want the message to Christoph to be stay as you are, but seek improvement in the things and areas you just mentioned, yes.
Perfect. Well, Christoph, thank you very much for giving me your time on this Tuesday afternoon. And we will see each other in 14 days.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.